Good morning, everybody. It is the 21st of January, 2024, coming at you from Parkland County, west of Edmonton. Just taking my partner's dog out for a walk and in the forest here. And I'm gonna go back and make some breakfast in a little bit, but I wanted to do, I wanted to do this episode on this snowy January day, answering the question, why is it that I left the seminary? So somebody might not even know that I was in the seminary and what seminary it was. So I guess I'll give you a little bit of background. And I won't get into probably why I went into the seminary. I suppose some of the reasons might be obvious. For some, it was more why I left that people have had questions about. And some people know, and some people have been told, but I figured I'd put it down in this journal because it's been a source of confusion and misinformation for a really long time. So let's see what we got. Okay, so by way of a little background, I was raised in the Roman Catholic tradition. My dad's side of the family was Roman Catholic. My mom's side of the family was nominally, hey Bradley, come out of there, was nominally united, but didn't really practice at all. And so the Roman Catholic tradition was the tradition that I claimed, baptized, First Communion, etc. Didn't go to church much growing up, but as I got into my undergrad, my second and third years in my undergrad, I actually started going to church on my own. And when I came to grad school up in Edmonton in 2001, I decided that I eventually wanted to do confirmation because I'd never received confirmation. But it took me until about 2003 to enroll in what's called the RCIA, Roman Catholic Initiation for Adults, not the Roman Catholic Intelligence Agency. That's a different thing. Ha ha. So I had long thought of becoming a priest. Even when I was little, there's pictures of me when I was 7, handing out Trident gum communion to my stuffed animals, pretending to say Mass. And it had long been with me. And in 2004, for a couple of reasons, which I'm not going to talk too much about, I decided to do it. And so I was accepted into St. Joseph Seminary in Edmonton, Alberta, Newman Theological College. And I began a 5-year formation period, or what should have been a 5-year formation period at the seminary. 2 years of theology, a year internship, and then ostensibly another 2 years of theology to complete a Master's of Divinity degree and receive the formation to become and operate as a Catholic priest. And so I completed my first 2 years of theology and an internship. I came back and completed another half year of theology and left the seminary. So I did not graduate with an MDiv, but I did have enough credits to eventually graduate with a Master's of Theological Studies, which was more of an academic degree than a pastoral degree. And I'd actually, people say, hey, you ripped off a bunch of money by doing that. Well, the truth of the matter is yeah, it's true, the Archdiocese covered lodging and food during the formation period. But the academic piece actually was largely covered by a scholarship, and it went by me. So I'd received a $10,000 vocation scholarship, and it turns out that the actual cost of the degree wasn't much. Well, it was, I think it came out to about, it was 12 or 14,000, something like that. So the scholarship itself paid for most of the theology training, the degree. And I actually paid the diocese back, partially at least, for the other piece. And one day I probably will pay the diocese back. I think I owe $1,000 or $2,000, something like that. And the diocese was very, at the time, the person that accepted me was now Cardinal Thomas Collins, who's Archbishop Emeritus of Toronto, but he used to be the Archbishop of Edmonton. And Tom was very clear about us entering the seminary that there are two ways to leave the seminary: as a priest or not as a priest. And in either case, the money went to good use because it taught people about the Roman Catholic faith and enabled them to go out into the world to do that. And people will say, well, Aaron, you aren't part of the Catholic Church anymore. How does that work? Well, the reality is I was a member of the church for a long time after, and I got into various ministries in parishes after I left the seminary, including teaching RCIA and catechesis, to which I did use that theological education for the purpose that it was intended. So, is it a ripoff of the diocese? Well, a lot would say no. Some would say yes, but a lot would say no. And I was the only seminary, at least at that seminarian, at least up to that point, that had paid anything back to the diocese if they had left the seminary. So much so that the chancellor of the diocese wrote me a note saying thanks for doing that because nobody else had done that. And it was appreciated. So my conscience is pretty clean in that regards. So I didn't leave the seminary because of the theological education. I thought I was taking a degree in running because I did not finish the degree that I was actually enrolled in. I just wanted to utilize the credits that I had accumulated via the scholarship that I had earned and make sure they didn't go to waste. So, I paid for finishing my thesis and that sort of stuff on my own. The diocese did not pay for that. And I paid back the diocese for a chunk of that theology. So, those of you that think he just ripped off the seminary and just wanted a theological education, it's not actually true. I got accused of that by a lot of people. So I entered the seminary in 2024. In my first year, throughout the whole seminary time, I had doubts. That is actually pretty normal. I came close to leaving after my first semester just because I was kind of turned around. There was a bunch of stuff that happened in my first 2 weeks in the seminary. The rector died right in front of me. Died of a heart attack. In fact, I was the last person he ever spoke to before he died. And a bunch of people, a lot of priests that fall who had been mentors to me, and actually one of them who had actually been on the board to accept me to the seminary died as well. There's a lot of death, a lot of loss. And I was feeling it, and I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to be able to handle this gig of being a priest. But I talked to my spiritual director and I talked to the bishop, and they said, keep going, don't stop. If you want to leave at the end of the year, that's one thing, but don't stop midway through like this. Just keep going. So I finished the year, and it was a good year. My first year was actually really good. I had doubts along the way. You're going to have doubts. It's a major life choice. But on balance, it was, keep going. So at the end of my first year, I ended up working for the summer in a cemetery. I went from seminarian to cemeterian. And it was really good because it was with a bunch of guys that were either in the seminary or coming into the seminary. And it was really good. And I entered into my second year. My second year was very different from my first. So my first semester of my second year was pure hell. Not because of the studies or anything, but there were a bunch of guys that had got accepted into the seminary who were just toxic toxic people. I'm not naming names, and I'm not going to name circumstances that I got into it. I'll just say there was a cadre of them that had been accepted that, oh my God, if you would have let them loose on a parish, you think that's bad now. Wait till you see what would have come out if they had become priests. It would have been a disaster. So, my struggle in my first semester, but they were gone by Christmas. In their case, two of them got kicked out lock, stock, and barrel right at Christmas time after one semester in the seminary. And another guy waited, it was the end of the year, but he was gonzo. They got rid of him because some of the stuff, guys, that was coming out of their mouths would have hurt more people. You have no idea. It was bad. So my second year, the second semester of my second year was okay, but my God, it was marked by crap. But at the end of the second semester in my second year, I was feeling okay. And something happened, actually, in the end of that second semester, is I got recruited by the military to be a chaplain, a student chaplain with the military. And having been in the military before, I said yes. So I signed up, I went off, I did basic training for my second summer job, because in the seminary you don't go all year, you usually went about 8 to 10 months. It's a little bit different now than it used to be, but at that time it was a standard academic year, and then for the summer you were expected to go out and find a job and live a life, right? Good reflection, good decompression from an intense academic information year. So I joined the military, did my basic training, got top candidate on course. I was pretty proud of that, because the first time I was in the military, things didn't go so well. It was a good experience, but painful. This one was a good experience, but I kind of redeemed myself in my own eyes, and I got top candidate on basic training, and went to send off to CFB Esquimalt, which is Victoria, BC, for a summer. And I really came up against a bit of a vocations crisis. I saw these priests there, and I saw people who were lay people who they'd done a Master's of Divinity, but they were all functioning as chaplains. And, the lay people, a lot of them had families and stuff. I began to question whether or not the priest, this military thing was pretty good. This was something I might really be interested in doing for a career. Do I need to be a priest? And so there was a lot of back and forth for me on that one. But something happened at the end of that summer. I went into a heart issue the first time. It's called atrial fibrillation. Those of you that know me will know what I'm talking about. I've had it now 10 times. So that was my first time. I was on board HMCS Winnipeg for 2 weeks out at sea on a trial and what they call fish patrol, looking for drug smugglers and stuff, right? Boat people. And one weekend, my heart went out. They had to fly me back to Victoria to set it right, and that ended my military career. Because you can't have an arrhythmia pop up like that. At least you couldn't at the time. I don't know what it's like now, but you couldn't have an arrhythmia pop up like that and function. So that ended my military career. And I was scheduled to actually go back to my internship. So I said, okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to give this a try. But the doubts really started to set in whether or not this priesthood thing was going to work for me. But I didn't really know why. And we'll talk about the development of that over the year to come. So I was graciously accepted into my internship year. Father Paul Theriault, now Bishop Paul Theriault, Emeritus Bishop of St. Paul, Alberta, was my internship supervisor. And the first month was a little rocky because I wasn't sure I wanted to be there. But as I continued on and I was in parish life and doing the various things, I really began to think, you know what? I think I'll be okay here. I think I can do this. And so I threw everything into it. And went through the Christmas season as an intern, went through the Easter season as an intern, and I was due to go back and do a second summer with the military at the end of May. So I ended my internship on a high note. It was, I felt really good, and I was going to go forward. And then I went to CFB Petawawa. Now, this is my second summer. I was a commissioned second lieutenant, student chaplain, and there I was in CFB Petawawa, and I got assigned as the student chaplain for first or second, damn, my memory's bad, first or second service battalion in Petawawa. There was this unit is big, is over 1,000 members in this, because they do all the drivers, the mechanics, the cooks, the supply people, the clerks, all of the sort of that support service for making, for the fighting component of the military. And at the time, Canada was heavily engrossed in the war in Afghanistan. And so the unit as a whole had just gotten back when I got there, like 2-3 weeks before, from a rotation in Afghanistan. And me being the student chaplain, there was a senior chaplain that was there. Usually this unit had two because it was so big and they had so many people rotating in and out of Afghanistan. I was supposed to be the second chaplain. But guess what happened? The chaplain, the senior chaplain, the trained chaplain, the major, he was a major. That's how, he was a senior chaplain. Got assigned for a 6-week TAV, as they called it at the time, to spell off the chaplains in Afghanistan who needed to go on their 2-week leave, mid-tour 2-week leave. And there was supposed to be another chaplain coming in to spell me off, but they didn't come right away. So it was me. And just as Kevin left, it was about 6 weeks back from the rotation from Afghanistan, and all hell broke loose. I get calls, suicide attempt calls, PTSD calls, people needing to... It was also the period where people are moved around in the military, and so couples were being split up after this rotation. One member of the couple was in the military, was being assigned to Vancouver or Victoria. Another member of the couple was being assigned to Halifax for 3 years. Insanity, right? So this is the shit that I'm dealing with. Student chaplain on my own for a month before the other senior chaplain arrived to help me out a little bit. So I really relied heavily on the other chaplains on base, but I was fried. And also at that time, I'd really begun to question whether the priesthood was my thing, because turns out I actually did meet somebody. I met somebody that summer, and I was more or less well behaved. But I did meet somebody, and it really began to question in the pressure cooker of what I was doing. Having met this person, was it really somebody that is this something that I was really called to do? And the other piece, it started to creep in, and it had started to creep in into my internship, and this is the key piece, is I began to question some of the hardline elements of Roman Catholic doctrine, especially when I was doing my military pieces. Guys, that's a different beast. It's a different way of looking at theology and God and spirituality. Much more fluid, because you're in interfaith teams, and so you have to find that common ground and be there for people who aren't really religious, but try and help them out, make sense of the why questions. And so the hardline, conservative, dogmatic, doctrinal approach of the seminary does not fit in a military chaplaincy. It can't. It would break. And it started to break for me because I was drilled in for 2 years that hardline, doctrinal, dogmatic approach of certainty about everything, right? And so in that second summer in particular, when I'm dealing with people who are trying to commit suicide, have PTSD, all manner of shit, didn't work. What really came up is, how does Roman Catholicism work in this type of reality? Okay, sure. For little old ladies sitting in a parish, you can play the doctrine card, you can play the dogma card, the certainty card. But you start working with people who are watching kids hacked up, blown up, or they themselves are getting blown up. I met a guy, he was trained to be a deacon, if you can believe it, in the Catholic Church, who was a truck driver. And he had been hit not once, but twice by improvised explosive devices as he was driving a fuel truck across the Afghan desert. And he was understandably traumatized. Vehicles in front and behind of him were not so lucky. And yet he was going forward. How does, so much of Catholic doctrine, the moralistic, it can't speak effectively, is what I found and what I came to believe. It couldn't speak effectively to what the actual experience of life was. Life's gray. It's not black and white. And my God was a black and white in the seminary. And I suppose that's how it's supposed to be. And the piece that you're supposed to come out with at the end is, how do you live in that gray? But I was struggling because I really was of the opinion the church was past its prime in being able to help people, especially people who were not religious. A lot of ex-Catholics, a lot of angry ex-Catholics, especially in the Franco ranks, the ones from Quebec. Whew. They did not want to hear about what the church had to say about X, but they wanted help. What do you do? And it became pretty apparent that the church was out of touch. So when I was done that, I was ready to hang up my skates. But the rector of the seminary said, listen, Aaron, come home. Come back, do a semester. If you want to leave at Christmas, leave at Christmas. I said, okay. So, against everything that my body was telling me, I went back. And it was the right thing to do, because I had an experience in that last semester that cemented for me, no, it's time to get out of this seminary. And it wasn't what you'd think it would be. What do you see, Bradley? In my last term, I took a theological anthropology course, and it ended up actually being the subdiscipline that I did my thesis, my master's of theological studies thesis in theological anthropology, although I picked a topic that I hadn't really touched on in that class. And in the theological anthropology, it's this theology of the human person, but it's more than that. It's the theology of the human person in relation to the divine, sin and grace, made in the image and likeness of God. What does that mean? Etc., etc. I love theological anthropology because it really gets into some of the big, you get into some of those other classes. Spiritual theology was my second favorite class. This was my favorite because theological anthropology is, where does the rubber meet the road for you as an individual, as a spiritual person? How do you fit in relationship with the divine life, with God, the church? How does that all fit together in the human person? So it was a beautiful capstone course. And the prof that I had at the time was a Franciscan, and he was known as a bit of a rebel. Bradley, come on, Bradley, come. But he was pretty orthodox, really, in the grand scheme of things. But he liked to push buttons, and he liked to challenge people. And a lot of the conservative seminarians, they hated him. Well, they didn't hate him, but they would do everything they could to avoid taking a class, because he introduced a degree of uncertainty into their dogmatic certainty. So it was kind of fun to watch. But in the class, we were assigned a major term paper. It's a master's program, and so I had to do a 30-page term paper on a topic of my choosing. And I chose a topic that kind of came out of nowhere in a way, but it didn't. So the topic that I chose was, if we encounter alien life, what does that mean for the Christ event? How does the church make sense of that? Right? I think I'm on the wrong side of the fence. I think I'm off the property here. I gotta get back. How does the church make sense of the Christ event? Because so much of the theology is earthbound, right? Jesus came to save humanity, right? Okay, well, what about the aliens? What does the church have to say about that? In summary, that was kind of what I was going. And word got out, because I told a few people about the topic of my paper. And guys, I gotta tell you, I have never seen so many angry people over a paper. My fellow seminarians were tearing strips off of me for doing that topic. How could you ask that question? How speculative is it? You know, how dare you? And even the rector of the seminary and some of the formation team members came up to me and said, Aaron, why are you doing this topic? Why are you even bringing that up? And I was so confused. I was so confused as to why they would be pissed off that that was the topic that I wanted to do. But it later became apparent why. It's because the church, already in crisis, didn't have an answer. Because if you're going to argue, and so in the paper, I did a bit of a tongue-in-cheek argument that it's okay that Jesus only came to earth to save the rest of the universe and all the aliens out there, because Jesus only came to Israel to save the rest of the world around us. So that's okay, right? My instructor gave me an A for the paper because I did a pretty well thought out paper, but he just laughed at me. He said, "Oh, Aaron, how are you going to sell that one?" And I didn't sell it because I got to tell you, I have never faced the vitriol over an academic paper that I did from my colleagues with the formation team. They were just incensed. And I realized to myself, you know what? If you can't answer that question, if you can't deal with large universal questions in an age where we're one radio signal away or one telescope picture away from finding evidence of extraterrestrial life, and if you can't answer how the church is going to deal with that question, we're done here. There's nothing to be done. The whole house of cards falls apart. And so I said, I'm out. I'm out of here. Because this is not what I signed up for. To be told that questions for inquiry were out of bounds, shouldn't be touched, they're speculative, no need to raise them. On something as monumental as that, bye-bye. Now, so I left the seminary. Had nothing to do with a woman. Had nothing to do with the prospect of not having a family. It was actually intellectual, if you can believe it, and spiritual. I had come so far out of alignment with the clergy of the Roman Catholic Church at that time that I had to leave the seminary because of it. And that's what it was. That's why I left the seminary. Now, turns out the following year, the Pope actually commissioned a group of study asking that question. And I don't know whatever actually happened to it. I never looked it up because I was long gone to the seminary out of that. And then later in life, the last couple of years, I come across some heavy hitters in Roman Catholicism, who I think are heavy hitters, a lot of conservatives don't, but I do, such as Richard Rohr, who tackled this particular question right on and have found a trap door for Catholic theology to be able to deal with large universal questions that largely remain faithful to sort of what the church stands for. It just turns it on its head a little bit and makes Catholicism, which means universal, actually into a universal religion. One that has room for Muslims and Buddhists and First Nations people without having them to give up their own spirituality. It fits together. And if I had known about that when I was getting ready to leave the seminary, I might not have left. How's that for a story, guys?